December 20th, 1943, high above northern Germany. The sky is a hard, pale blue, and the cold is so deep it turns breath into ice inside an oxygen mask. A B-17F drifts behind the retreating bomber stream, slower with every mile. One engine is dead, another is failing. The nose is torn open, metal ribs exposed to the slipstream. Inside, men move carefully through cramped passageways, stepping around blood, loose ammunition, shattered glass. Their guns hang at strange angles, some jammed, some frozen, some silent from damaged power. Then a single fighter rises into view, gray-green, compact, precise. It closes until faces are visible through canopies, close enough to end it in seconds. By late 1943, the air war over Europe has hardened into routine violence. Day after day, the 8th Air Force sends heavy bombers out of Britain in daylight, betting that tight formation, altitude, and overlapping guns can protect them long enough to hit the heart of German industry. The theory is arithmetic: enough bombers, enough 50 caliber fire, enough discipline. So the formation becomes a moving fortress instead of a set of individual targets. But the Germans have adapted to that arithmetic. Fighter control is faster. Interceptions are timed. Attacks are concentrated on the edges, where one damaged aircraft can loosen the entire geometry. The men in the bomb groups know the phrase for it: Purple Heart Corner. A position on the vulnerable outside of a combat box, where a crew can do everything right and still be singled out simply because the enemy can reach them first. On 23 December 1943, the target is Bremen, a city tied to shipyards, ports, and aircraft production. One of the nodes the Allies believe must be cut if Germany's war machine is to slow. The mission briefing is not theatrical. It is procedural, almost clinical. Routes, altitudes, expected fighter strength, flak concentrations. The words are delivered like weather. A B-17F called Olde Pub rolls toward the runway from RAF Kimballton, carrying a crew that is still learning what routine means at 26,000 feet. They will climb into the same thin air where instruments can freeze and engines feel every small wound. In the formation, the bomber's safety is not armor. It is proximity. The closer the planes hold together, the harder it is for a single fighter to stay alive long enough to make repeated attacks. That is the logic that keeps men calm. And then the formation nears the defended zone, where flak and fighters begin to turn theory into damage. Because in this war, the difference between protected and alone can be measured in seconds. The first damage comes quickly, and it comes unevenly. As Olde Pub approaches the bomb run, German flak reaches up in black, timed bursts, tearing holes through the formation. One shell detonates close enough to rip through the bomber's nose. Plexiglass shatters. Cold air floods in. The bombardier and navigator are hit, wounded by fragments and flying debris. Almost immediately, engine number 2 is knocked out, its propeller windmilling uselessly in the slipstream. The aircraft falls behind. Not dramatically at first, just a few hundred yards, but in a bomber stream, distance compounds. Another engine begins to run rough. Electrical systems flicker. Oxygen lines are damaged. Hydraulic pressure drops. The bomber can still fly, but it can no longer hold position. And once a B-17 slips out of its assigned place, the formation does not slow down to retrieve it. German fighters arrive as the formation turns for home. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s make repeated passes using the crippled bomber's isolation with practiced efficiency. They attack from angles that avoid what guns still function. Several of Olde Pub's defensive positions are already compromised, some gunners wounded, others dealing with weapons that have frozen or lost power in the extreme cold. Inside the aircraft, Movement becomes careful and deliberate. Men step over spent shell casings and tangled wiring. The pilot, Second Lieutenant Charles Charlie Brown, fights the controls as the aircraft struggles to maintain altitude. Every decision is narrowed to essentials: trim, airspeed, direction. The possibility of bailing out exists, but only in theory. One crewman is too badly injured to jump safely. Leaving him behind is not discussed. By now, the bomber is no longer part of a mission. It is a singular object in hostile airspace, drifting toward the North Sea under its own momentum. The German pilots circling it understand exactly what they are looking at. This is the moment the air war is designed for, when training, fuel, and ammunition converge on a target that cannot escape. And that is when one fighter closes in closer than the others, steady and unhurried, until the cockpit of the bomber fills the windscreen. Human. Inside the bomber, the war has narrowed to immediate survival. The temperature at altitude is far below freezing, and with the nose torn open, the cold is constant and invasive. Blood stiffens on flight suits. Oxygen masks press hard against faces already numb. The wounded are conscious, but shock is close. Movements are slow, deliberate, economical, because sudden motion can mean collapse in thin air. There is no panic. Panic wastes oxygen. Instead, the crew operates on habit drilled into muscle memory. The radio operator checks systems that no longer respond. Gunners remain at their stations even when their weapons are silent. No one says it out loud, but every man understands the equation. If the aircraft goes down, there will be no second chance. Over Germany, survival is binary. The choice not to bail out is not framed as bravery. It is logistics. One man cannot jump. Leaving him behind would mean deciding who lives before the aircraft itself has finished deciding. That line is not crossed. The bomber stays together because the crew stays together. Tactical. From the outside, the situation is stark. A lone B-17 is no longer a fortress. It is a sequence of vulnerabilities. Its defensive concept depends on mutual coverage. Alone, blind spots widen. Firing arcs overlap less. Ammunition expenditure becomes meaningless if guns cannot traverse or cycle. The bomber's speed advantage is gone. Its altitude margin is shrinking. German fighter doctrine is built for this moment. Stragglers are prioritized because they reduce risk and increase efficiency. A single fighter can make multiple passes without entering dense crossfire. The objective is not heroism, it is certainty. As the B-17 drifts toward the coast, its survival window is measured in minutes. Every mile increases the odds of interception. Every lost foot of altitude narrows engine tolerance. Tactically, the aircraft is already written off by anyone observing from a distance. Except one pilot does not observe from a distance. He moves in close. So close. That tactical logic begins to dissolve into something else entirely. Technological. The B-17 is designed as a system of systems. Engines, electrics, hydraulics, oxygen, heat, each one supports the others. Damage does not need to be catastrophic to be decisive. When cold air pours through an open nose, lubricants thicken, motors slow, electrical relays fail unpredictably. Guns that work on the ground seize in flight. Turrets that should rotate smoothly lock in place at the worst possible moment. At partial power, the aircraft lives on margins. One dead engine is survivable. Two are not. Holding altitude becomes a negotiation with physics. The pilot trims constantly, balancing drag against lift, coaxing what remains out of damaged machinery. Any aggressive maneuver risks a stall that cannot be recovered at that height. From the outside, the bomber looks finished. From the inside, it is still flying. That difference matters. The fighter approaching understands the machine he is looking at. He can see through the torn metal and shattered plexiglass. He can see which guns track him and which do not. He can read damage the way mechanics read stress fractures. This is not speculation. This is professional recognition. Leadership. Moral Franz Stigler, flying a Messerschmitt Bf 109, has already destroyed bombers. He is not inexperienced, and he is not naive. He has been trained to finish isolated aircraft quickly before escort fighters appear. His fuel is limited. His ammunition is finite. Everything about his mission argues for efficiency. But distance changes things. Up close, he sees wounded men. He sees a bomber that cannot defend itself. He recognizes that this aircraft is no longer a combatant in any meaningful tactical sense. It is a vehicle struggling to remain airborne. Stigler has been taught rules that predate this war. Do not shoot parachutes. Do not kill men who cannot fight back. Those rules are not written into modern air combat doctrine, but they persist quietly in the margins of training and memory. So he does not fire. Instead, he flies alongside a bomber that should not exist anymore, making a decision that cannot be undone once taken. And in that narrowing airspace between two aircraft, the war pauses, just long enough to change shape. The fighter draws level with the bomber's cockpit, close enough that paint details and panel seams are visible. Inside Olde Pub, the sudden proximity triggers instinct. The top turret tracks the Messerschmitt, slow and stiff, its guns following the movement without firing. No one knows if they even can fire. No one is certain whether the next second will bring cannon shells through the fuselage. Charlie Brown keeps his hands steady on the controls. Any evasive movement risks a stall. Any dive could overstress damaged wings. The aircraft holds its course, neither accelerating nor turning, because there is no margin left to spend. In the Messerschmitt, Franz Stigler studies the bomber. In silence, he can see through the shattered nose into the flight deck. He can see wounded crewmen slumped at their stations. He can see that several gun positions are unmanned or inoperative. This is not a guess. It is visible fact. Stigler tries to communicate. He gestures with his hand. He points, then motions downward, an attempt to signal a landing, or at least a diversion away from German airspace. He indicates a direction that, to him, means Sweden, a neutral country where the crew could survive the war as prisoners instead of corpses. Inside the bomber, the gestures are unreadable. The crew has been trained to expect deception. A landing signal could be a trick to draw them lower, closer to flak. The idea of Sweden exists somewhere in briefing rooms and intelligence maps, but not in this cockpit. Not now. Not with blood freezing on the floor. Brown shakes his head. He mouths words Stigler cannot hear. The bomber continues on its heading. At any moment, Stigler can fire. A short burst from his nose-mounted cannon would be enough. He does not need to aim carefully. The target fills his windscreen. He is close enough that he cannot miss. But firing now would not be combat in the sense he understands it. It would be execution. And once the trigger is pulled, there is no space left for judgment, only aftermath. Stigler makes a different choice. He slides his fighter into position, not ahead of the bomber, not behind it, but alongside, where any German flak battery seeing them from the ground will hesitate, uncertain whether it is about to shoot down its own aircraft. The coast is approaching. Below them, the land begins to thin into water. The dark line of the German coastline recedes, and the gray expanse of the North Sea opens ahead. For the first time since the damage began, the bomber's chances are no longer theoretical. Open water means fewer guns. Fewer guns mean time. Stigler holds position with careful precision. He does not weave. He does not crowd the bomber. He flies just far enough off the wing to be seen, close enough to be mistaken, by flak crews on the ground, for an escort rather than an executioner. It is a dangerous calculation. If another German fighter appears, questions will follow. If ground observers report the pairing, consequences will follow later. None of that is abstract to him. Inside Ye Olde Pub, the crew watches without speaking. No one moves to man a jammed gun. No one waves. The silence is heavy, but it is not empty. The aircraft shudders in the cold air, engines straining unevenly, controls sluggish. Every second aloft feels borrowed. The fighter remains with them until the last practical moment. When the coastline is well behind and the risk of friendly fire is past, Stigler eases back. He aligns his aircraft slightly ahead, rolls his wings once, and raises his hand in a formal salute. It is a gesture without theatrics, brief, restrained, unmistakable. Brown watches the fighter peel away and disappear. There is no triumph in the cockpit, no cheering. The bomber is still wounded. The war is not finished with them yet. The crossing of the North Sea is long and exposed. Wind buffets the aircraft. Fuel calculations are revised and revised again. The dead engine's propeller is finally feathered to reduce drag. Altitude is traded for airspeed. Carefully, deliberately. Navigation is done by memory and instrument fragments that still function. Eventually, land appears. England is not dramatic from the air, just darker ground under cloud, but it is enough. The bomber limps toward the nearest safe field, descending slowly, fighting gravity with what remains of its structure. When Ye Olde Pub touches down, it does not do so cleanly. The landing is hard, controlled only by discipline and exhaustion. The engines wind down unevenly. The aircraft rolls to a stop. The men inside are alive. They will not speak of what happened in detail, not yet. There are questions that cannot be answered safely in a briefing room. There are reports that will be edited by silence. But one fact remains unchanged. A bomber that should have been destroyed crossed hostile airspace intact because one man decided that winning did not require pulling the trigger. The bomber comes to rest at RAF Seething in Norfolk, its airframe scarred and incomplete. Ground crews approach cautiously, uncertain at first whether the aircraft is safe to touch. The damage is extensive. Holes punched through wings and fuselage, the nose torn open, one engine dead, another barely serviceable. From the outside, it is difficult to understand how it stayed airborne at all. Inside, the cost is counted in quieter terms. One crewman has died from his wounds. Others are evacuated immediately, suffering from blood loss, shock, and frost exposure. There is no ceremony. Medical teams work with efficiency born of repetition. The war has made this familiar. During debriefing, Charlie Brown is warned carefully. The encounter with the German fighter is not something to be emphasized. Allied airmen are expected to report enemy behavior accurately, but mercy is an uncomfortable category. To suggest that a Luftwaffe pilot deliberately spared a bomber risks misunderstandings about discipline, propaganda value, and morale. Brown understands the implication. Some facts are safer left unspoken. The aircraft itself is not returned to combat duty. Its structural damage is too severe, and newer models are already replacing the B-17F in frontline units. Ye Olde Pub becomes a record rather than a weapon, a data point in maintenance logs and loss tables that do not capture how close it came to disappearing altogether. For the crew, survival does not feel like victory. It feels like interruption. Missions continue. Aircraft are lost on subsequent raids. The war presses forward with the same mechanical insistence it always has. And on the other side of the conflict, Franz Stigler lands and files his own report, one that cannot include what truly happened without risking court-martial. In the Luftwaffe, aiding the enemy even by omission, is not an ethical debate. It is a capital offense. So the incident passes into silence, carried only in memory, waiting for a future in which it can be spoken aloud. For decades, the incident remains unrecorded in official histories. The war ends, units disband, aircraft are scrapped. Men return to civilian lives carrying fragments of memory that do not fit neatly into victory narratives. The air war becomes statistics, sortie counts, tonnage dropped, loss ratios, while moments that resist categorization fade into private recollection. Charlie Brown does not forget. The image of the fighter flying alongside his shattered bomber stays fixed in his mind, unresolved. In the late 1980s, long after uniforms have been folded away, he begins to search. He places notices in Pilot Association newsletters, asking a simple question. Did any German pilot remember escorting a damaged B-17 out over the North Sea? Years pass before an answer comes. In 1990, Brown and Franz Stigler finally make contact. Their meeting is not dramatic. There are no speeches, no formal apologies. Instead, there is recognition. Two men confirming that the same moment existed from opposite sides of the cockpit. What had been silence becomes shared memory. They meet again and again. The war recedes further into the past, but the clarity of that decision remains. Stigler explains his reasoning plainly. He had been taught by a former commanding officer that shooting a helpless enemy was dishonorable. Brown listens, understanding that the explanation does not excuse the war, but it explains the man. Their connection does not revise history. It does not alter casualty figures or strategic outcomes, but it confirms something quieter. That individual agency survived even inside systems designed to eliminate it. Both men die in 2008, within months of each other. Their story enters the historical record not as legend, but as testimony, corroborated, restrained, and incomplete in the way all real events are. It stands not as evidence of mercy conquering war, but of restraint existing briefly within it, an exception that proves how rare such moments truly were. The survival of Olde Pub did not change the course of the Second World War. Factories continued to burn. Crews continued to fall from the sky. The arithmetic of air power remained brutally consistent. But this event clarified something essential about modern warfare: how little space it leaves for judgment, and how much weight rests on the moments when judgment is still possible. The B-17 was engineered to endure punishment, but not isolation. Its strength lived in formation, procedure, and redundancy. Once separated, technology alone could not save it. What kept the aircraft airborne long enough to reach safety was discipline inside the cockpit and restraint outside it. Leadership in war is often discussed in terms of command and outcomes. Here, leadership appeared in a narrower frame. A pilot at close range, weighing doctrine against consequence, deciding whether victory required one more destroyed machine. The decision was not sentimental. It was controlled, informed, and final. History remembers battles and operations because they scale. This moment mattered because it did not. It unfolded beyond orders, beyond observation, in a space where a single action carried no strategic value, only human cost. When the war reduced men to targets and machines to probabilities, one encounter briefly resisted that logic, not as a myth, not as a miracle, but as a reminder that even in total war, the outcome of a single trigger pull is never automatic and never without meaning.